Can you still graduate debt-free in today's economy? I personally believe that debt-free degrees are still possible. This episode is purposed with showing you how I managed to graduate debt-free and cover my top 10 tips so that you or your children can graduate debt-free too. Sticking around for all 10 tips may be one of the most valuable things you do today because graduating debt-free may be the best foundation for your hope-filled financial future. Good morning and welcome to the HopeFilled Financial Podcast. My name is Jay Disberger, your one and only HopeFilled Financial Coach, and I'm happy that you're here with us today. To get things started with our focus today on debt-free degrees, I want to share my personal story and how I graduated debt-free with an engineering degree from Kansas State University. You need to know, for starters, I tried to lay out a good plan so that I could be working a part-time job that wouldn't be a major burden on me all the way through school. I found it most appealing, for some reason, to work as a pin boy at a bowling alley. No, not resetting the pins, but I worked behind the machines, helping free up jams when balls would get stuck or pins wouldn't set. And I also cleaned the lanes and made sure that they were well oiled. Well, I got that job lined up just before I started my freshman year and got fired before I had the chance to start my first class.
You're fired. Go.
I was really counting on this job to be my part-time income foundation to support my debt-free degree. And as a result of losing that job, I ended up not having a part-time job through my freshman year. This was okay because I had enough savings to get through. And just in case you're thinking it, when I say I graduated debt-free, it wasn't because my parents paid for my tuition. They didn't pay for my tuition, they didn't pay for my books, they didn't pay for my materials. I put myself through school. My parents did, however, make sure that I had a roof over my head, and I am sincerely grateful for that. All right, back to the story. I failed to secure a stable part-time job leading into college, and I also failed to get the scholarships I was striving for. You see, Kansas State University looks at ACT scores to establish freshman scholarships that are granted by the university, and I had a composite ACT score of 27. The threshold for a full ride for that first year was 28. I missed it by 1 point. I took that test twice, and I did not make it. What I did get was a scholarship that paid for everything shy of about $4,000. That $4,000 came out of what I had in savings. I only had about $5,000 in savings going into that freshman year. And I knew that the academic pace that I wanted to maintain to graduate when I wanted was going to be too aggressive for me to work enough hours to pay for it all out of pocket. I needed scholarships, so my freshman year I focused so hard on my academics, and I made it through that freshman year with a 4.0. That helped a lot. In fact, I believe the university put more weight on that freshman 4.0 GPA than they did my ACT score because they granted me enough scholarship money that I was able to again get through my second academic year debt-free. I had about $900 left after my freshman year. I had the income that I'd earned from a summer job between academic years, and I had the scholarships that were granted to me from that 4.0 GPA. And I want you to know I did not get a 4.0 GPA because I was quote unquote gifted or smart. I just worked hard. I worked really hard. Starting that second academic year, I got a job as a tutor. I tutored 14 to 16 hours every week from that point on through the next 4 years. And every single summer, I worked full-time at an internship, be it in Kansas, Nebraska, Texas, or Utah. Now, my goal of graduating debt-free was trending well enough that I added a concurrent master's degree to my bachelor's in architectural engineering. I also added a minor in physics. This extended me from a 5-year bachelor's program to a 6-year total college career. And those graduate credits were significantly more expensive, but I switched from being a tutor to a graduate teaching assistant. This covered a good chunk of my graduate credits and paid me more per hour than the tutoring job did. But I really enjoyed my tutoring job, so I continued to do it freelance for my last academic year. And all through this time, I was a frugal guy. I did everything I could to save money to the point that I became obsessed with free food.
Regardless of how long it took, I'm sure we can all agree on one thing. Free food is amazing.
I said yes to almost everything that involved free food. And saying yes to free food changed my life. I not only got involved with about a dozen student organizations at the officer level because I said yes for free food, but I landed my first job because I said yes to an event with free food. I also met my wife at a barn dance where there was free food. I didn't dance in college. I didn't want to go because I'm like, why go to a dance if you don't dance? I mean, imagine babyface me, engineering nerd, trying to do a line dance in a barn. But I said yes because there was going to be free food there. And that's where I was introduced to my wife, and we started talking about academics. We started talking about education. We started talking about our mutual tutoring experience, and that led us into a beautiful friendship and then our married relationship. All this to say, I had an academic experience that I wouldn't trade for the world. My life was changed because I went to Kansas State University and I fought hard to graduate debt free. Over those 6 years, I earned about $75,000 in scholarships. And tuition totaled about $78,000 for my 6 years. From scholarships alone, my tuition was almost full ride. And working the jobs that I did allowed me to afford my books, materials, transportation, and a college experience that I will never forget. One of the best things to come out of this was being able to go into the working world outside of college and just start saving without having to worry at all about auto debt or student loan debt. My greatest wealth building tool, my newfound engineering income, was free to engage with wealth building savings so that I could establish a stellar foundation for my hope-filled financial future without having to start behind the eight ball and get out of student loan debt first. That's what I want for you. I know you can do it. I know your path isn't going to be exactly like mine, but I know that if you put your mind to it and you believe it is possible to graduate debt-free today, that you can. And that's why for the main topic, we're going to be covering my top 10 tips to graduate debt-free. For our main topic, we're going to be going through my top 10 tips so that you or your children can graduate from college debt-free. Now, this assumes that college is the path of choice for you or your child. I'm not going to go into whether or not college is the right choice for you today, as that merits a full episode all to itself. Subscribe if you don't want to miss when I cover that. But for now, we're going to talk about graduating debt-free, and my first tip is to pick a school that is inexpensive but still provides you with high value. And this tip can be extended to your field of study as well. Let me give you an example from my personal experience. I graduated with an architectural engineering degree. That's what I knew I wanted to study before I started school. I remember looking up a list of the top universities that offer architectural engineering as a degree because not all schools do. That was my career of choice. I saw the first one was, I believe, Penn State, for which I'd have to pay out-of-state tuition. In one academic year at Penn State was going to cost over $50,000 at the time. $50,000 for one academic year. That means in 2 years, I would spend more going to Penn State than I did for my entire 6 years at Kansas State University. And second on that list that I found was Kansas State University. The description literally said, K-State offers the exact same academic value as Penn State, but for a fraction of the cost. At least that's what it said in the list. And I mean, think about it. Why would I spend 5 to 10x as much money to get the exact same degree, to get the exact same value for the exact same career? It does not make sense. Now, at K-State, we had something called the K-State 8 when I was in school. This represented the core stuff, the prerequisites, if you will, that almost everyone, regardless of their field of study, had to take. The first year or two can really cover a lot of broad courses that you could take at a junior college or a community college and then roll over to your university's degree in order to save even more money. I remember running the numbers. Going for community college credits for my first year or two would have been a benefit had I not had the scholarships I did. It was a wash. And I would have also taken AP classes as a high school student because you get more bang for your buck for college credits if they're accepted by the university you're going to. This is actually something that I tried to do, but we moved right when I would have needed to be enrolled in those courses, so it just didn't end up working out. All right, tip number 2, save like crazy and apply for scholarships like they're going out of fashion. I remember saving money as a kid, putting money in my bank account. My parents opened a savings account for me. And I'd go to the bank, I'd deposit the money, and I would say, I'm saving for college. I'm saving for college. I even said that before I realized what college was. And as I was working through my high school years, I realized that I needed to be applying for scholarships. What I have in front of me now is a PowerPoint that I utilize when I'm teaching teenagers about personal financial literacy. It's part of my entire financial literacy curriculum that's targeted to high schoolers. On this slide, say to get good scholarships, focus on getting good grades and maximizing your ACT/SAT scores, depending on where you are and where you want to go to school. Also, apply for as many scholarships as possible. Here are 4 websites where if you're looking for scholarships, I recommend you try myscholly.com, myscholly.com, fastweb.com, scholarships.com, and capex.com. And don't forget that scholarships are more than just based off of your academic aptitude. They could be based in your extracurricular activities or your financial need. For that reason, I tell teens to keep track of all their activities and employment so that they have it on record to apply for these scholarships and to look out for scholarships that are applicable to various sports that they may be interested. I also highly recommend that they do some volunteer work because there are scholarships that are strongly based in your ability to serve the community. Now, I also say as you're going through your extracurriculars and your work experience to ask and collect references and to stay organized. Truly, if you're not organized, applying for as many scholarships as possible can feel really daunting. But if you get your ducks in a row, it starts to become routine in a good way. Now, before we move on to tip number 3, one thing I wish I would have taken advantage of with my savings that I had for college is investing in a 529 or at least running the money through a 529 account so that I could see some sort of tax benefit. Now, tip number 3 is something that I did, and that is if you have the opportunity, live in your mother's basement.
With these morons who live in their mother's basement.
Reason why I make this a tip is room and board is expensive, and going out of state is expensive. What my parents did is they said that they would let me live at home as long as I continued to maintain full-time enrollment in my academic career and I could stay at home until I graduated. They did this not only to remove one of the major expenses that college students incur, but also they did that to encourage us to go to Kansas State University, where the Disberger family had been going since the 1950s. My Grandpa Jay, went to Kansas State University way back in his day and studied architectural engineering before transferring out of that program to the business school. Now time for tip number 4, and that is own an ugly, inexpensive, used car. You want it to be reliable, but you don't need anything fancy when you're in school. You need something that can get you from point A to point B, and you need something that you can pay for in cash. And if it doesn't cost a lot of money, you can hopefully get your insurance premiums down too. I know that as a guy who was under the age of 25, car insurance was very expensive while I was in school. What my parents did for me on this front was purchased a car that I could use to get to and from, again, trying to encourage me to go to K-State. They're like, we'll provide you transportation if you stay here, and you can buy this car from us when you have the cash. And I remember cutting a check for $3,200 to my mom to buy that car after my freshman year. After that first summer internship, actually, between my freshman year and sophomore year. And I kept that car for a couple years after before upgrading to another one that cost $5,000. That first car that I owned, the $3,200 car, that was a Volkswagen Passat. It was white. It looked like a golf ball because of hail damage.
How many dents do you think are in the hood, guys? 100? 150?
Oh, God.
No, that's 1,000.
And the second car that I owned was an Infiniti G35 sedan. It was old and it had plenty of miles on it, but it was reliable, largely, more so than the Passat was. It had cosmetic issues, though. It had a massive basketball-sized dent in it, among other issues that really helped drive the price down. I didn't end up buying a car that I was super proud of until after I graduated. And even then, I still bought it in cash. I think it was $8,000 that I spent on a BMW SUV, which I later found out that BMW stands for Burn My Wallet, but that's a story for another day. Let's move on to tip 5. Tip 5 is to know the viability of your financial plan for the entirety of your academic career. When I was getting ready for school, I had a 5-year plan. It ended up becoming a 6-year plan. You heard about that in the story. But I needed to make sure that my tuition, books, and supply expenses were not going to exceed the expected income that I was going to have. I was going to have earned income from my side hustles, from working part-time as a tutor and working my summer jobs, and from scholarships. If I were to add those sources of income up for each semester, was I going to be able to have a gap between it and the rest of my bare bone minimum academic expenses? If you're on YouTube or Rumble, what I'm sharing for the video component of the podcast is another slide from that teen financial literacy course that I wrote. This represents a 4-year cash flow plan where the green bars are all income and the red bars are all the expenses, as itemized down here in the legend. And then this purple line that runs down here represents the balance of savings. In this particular instance, we're assuming that the college student started with about $5,000 in savings before engaging with a 4-year academic career with a full-blown in-state university. Their total expenses every semester are around $8,000 when you add up tuition, room and board, books, and supplies. And the total income in this hypothetical plan starts around $5,000. Again, that includes scholarships and ends up climbing above $6,000, $7,000 by the end of the academic career, because internships and summer jobs should pay more by the time that you are a senior. In this first plan, Plan A that's illustrated, you can see that the purple line trends negative, which would necessitate, in order to make this work, a student loan. In fact, the negative balance at the end of this plan is $5,413, meaning that that's the bare minimum student loan amount that would need to be taken out in order to make this plan a reality. Or we can change things around to try to make it work better. The first 2 years are replaced by going to a junior or community college. This really drops the expenses. Actually, I think the total is now $5,000 or below $5,000 for these first 2 years. Another change that is assumed here for Plan B is that the student earns an extra $1,000 before starting college, so they're now beginning their freshman year with $6,000. But unfortunately, on semester 6, the savings still dips negative. But at the end of the academic career, this negative balance is now only $1,210, meaning that we've cut the amount of student loan debt that would be needed to get through here by a lot. But we can do better. This is illustration C. In illustration C, the first 2 whole years are replaced with community college or junior college. And this change alone makes it so that this particular college student can graduate debt-free with a little bit of extra change in their savings. I think this is important because understanding the viability of your plan can help you have faith in it and can help inspire you to stay on track as you're going through. Speaking of staying on track, that's what I did. I kept a budget. I knew what I needed to have my expenses be for every academic year, thus every semester, thus every single month. And I could make sure that my income and expenses were staying on track for my overall long-term plan. Tip number 6 is a given, somewhat assumed in the last one, and that's going to be take summer jobs or internships. This is as much a financial tip for graduating debt-free as it is career advice. Building up that working experience, especially experience that's applicable to the career that you want after you graduate, is very, very valuable. I learned more on some of my internships than I did in the classroom. And those internships made me a much more valuable employee on my first job getting out of school. Tip number 7 is to focus hard on getting good grades. You see, universities and colleges pride themselves on good academic records. It's what gives them their reputation. So they want to reward you if you do a good job in the classroom. Getting close to that 3.5 to 4.0 GPA can really boost your scholarship opportunities that are offered directly from your college or university, as well as third-party scholarships. I remember scouring campus and talking to different academic leaders to ask about outside scholarship opportunities that I could apply for. I found on one floor of one room across campus from where I normally was a scholarship that was associated with degrees that would encourage green energy or energy reduction in order to help the environment and help us conserve energy as a society. That scholarship just looked at your academic record, your degree field, and a single page where you wrote out why your degree is going to help conserve energy in the future. And it wasn't a small scholarship either. It was one of the top 3 biggest scholarships I got in my academic career, and it was one that I could renew every year. Okay, tip number 8 is work a part-time job when you're in school. I know that I just said focus on your academics. And yes, I want you to focus on your academics. But splitting your time between a part-time job, especially one that's on campus, and your academics, which are full-time, can be done. In fact, I believe there are some statistics out there that I've seen that say college students who work while they're in school academically outperform those who don't work a part time job while they're in school. It simply takes more diligent and intentional time management to balance academics and that part time job. And that part time job can actually help you with your academics too. I worked as a tutor. This gave me flexible hours that I could move around my academic schedule. It also allowed me to touch upon old prerequisites to classes that I would have taken 2, 3 years prior that were applicable to my upper level courses. It allowed me to stay super sharp on the fundamentals to more complicated subjects in higher level coursework. For me, it was the perfect job. And if nobody came around for tutoring when I had tutoring hours, I could just work on my own stuff. I could simply do my own homework and get paid for it because I was an open door tutor. All right, now tip number 9, and this is the one that's going to get me the most grief. And that's going to be avoid caffeine and alcohol for as long as humanly possible while you're in school.
How do you get out of bed in the morning? Are you okay? Are you happy? How do you smile? I don't understand.
And before you give me a piece of your mind in the comments, let me explain. And we'll start with the coffee. I knew as a college student that if I began a caffeine habit, I would become dependent on that caffeine habit. And I know that buying coffee on campus is expensive. And I did eventually learn this firsthand. I went a few years before I became dependent on coffee. I wanted to make sure that my long plan, my 5, 6 year plan, was going to have me coming out of school debt free before I took some of my quote unquote free spending money and applied it to coffee or tea. I ended up also really getting into a tea company called Zest Tea. They don't sponsor this at all, but each tea bag is the equivalent of 2 cups of coffee and it doesn't give you the jitters. I always told my parents that I wasn't going to drink coffee with them until I hit a point where I felt like I was financially comfortable and was for sure going to graduate debt free. And there was a day I ran the numbers in the morning and I was tired and there was free coffee that was available. Again, free food is a thing that I loved. And I looked at it. I'm like, I'm going to graduate debt free. I know I can. I know I will. And I'm going to have some disposable income now for the rest of my academic career. This is great. So I went over and drank my very first cup of coffee. It was just black. I didn't put anything in it. It wasn't that big, but wow, when that caffeine hit, I ran a lap around the engineering building before walking back into the library and crashing hard. And eventually it led to an addiction that was beyond reasonable. You see, by the time I was in grad school, I was averaging like 2 to 3 hours of sleep a night. I was pushing myself hard to write my thesis, and I was very dependent on caffeine. There was one morning I remember cutting cold turkey after finals week, and a group of students who were still around were going to go to church, like it's 7 a.m. And afterwards, we were all going to get donuts. And I went not only for the donuts because I wanted that, but because a new friend of mine who's now my wife was going to this thing. And I was walking out of the church on the way to my car so I could drive over to Varsity Donuts and I could get a donut. And I blacked out. I blacked out. I passed out. I fainted right there. A couple guys caught me. They helped me recoup. And it was just caffeine withdrawals. It was that bad. So to reiterate, I would recommend that you delay your caffeine dependence as long as possible and that you don't overdo it. When it comes to the alcohol is expensive. And going out and social drinking, while sure might be for many part of the college experience, it's expensive. And I personally found it to be a distraction from my academics, from keeping good grades. And I wasn't about that. I wasn't going to let alcohol break my focus and break the bank. I had made a promise to many that I would introduce alcohol as something that was acceptable to me after I graduated. The day I graduated, I shared a glass of wine with Amanda, and that was an experience in the story for another time. Let's just move on to tip number 10. This one's fun, free food. And I'm going to extend this to simply making good and frugal decisions, but free food is truly amazing. College students get offered many free opportunities as long as you don't end up on the hook for something that is going to be a detriment to you. I mentioned it in the story, but many of the extracurricular activities and events that I got involved with were because I went for the free food. And I was like the yes man when it came to free food. hey, Jay, can you give a speech talking about tutoring in the campus, or go to this high school and talk about how cool K-State is for the ambassadors? And I'd be like, yeah. And then they're like, there's going to be pizza. And I'm like, I am there. What time? And in many instances, to help support me, my parents offered me free food. They let me eat breakfast at home before I'd go to school. They let me pack a lunch. And if I was staying on campus late for dinner, I'd have to buy my own dinner. But if I made it in time, I could eat dinner with them at home. And well, I wasn't paying rent. I tried to take advantage of every frugal opportunity that I could to reduce my costs, yet still come out with the same value. And I'll extend this to one more thing, which would be the textbooks that I had. Some of them were like $200-300 textbooks. It was ridiculous. I ended up finding some websites. I'll include it in the description below. I forget it off the top of my head, where I could get used textbooks at a very small fraction of the cost. And if you buy expensive textbooks that you don't want to save, it would be a frugal idea to sell those back or sell them to another student, probably at a discount, but still, it can help you recoup some of your upfront cost on those books. All right, those are my top 10 tips to help you or your children graduate debt-free. What did you think of these tips, and is there anything that you would add? If there is, let me know in the comments below. And until next week, until next Tuesday, budget bravely and enjoy your hope-filled financial future.